One of my favorite things about the Imperial Guard is the juxtaposition of sci-fi and antiquated war. Like this Lehman Russ that's rocking a plasma cannon but still runs on liquid fuel like promethium. The lasgun, an energy weapon capable of removing an arm that can be fixed with the bayonet to charge an enemy. Or an officer carrying a power sword in one hand and a revolver in the other. The revolver isn't something you hear about in Warhammer lore all too often, with the las and bolt pistols being front and center. The revolver is easily eclipsed. That being said, Darktide has given the weapon platform some love, and that's what we'll be going over today. I'll be giving a brief explanation for lore, how the revolver works in general, how I use it in-game, and compare it to revolvers in real life. So, lore-wise, there isn't much to say. Revolvers would be classified as stub guns, the majority of them being crude or jerry-rigged as they were made by poor people for poor people. Gangs like to use them, and if they saw use in the Imperial Guard, it is as a backup weapon for specialist troopers like flamers, plasma, and melta-gunners. Again, it's just not something that's really brought up when you have las and bolt pistols. That being said, how they work and the version Fat Shark used is the interesting bit. There are three main types of revolvers: side gate, top break, and swing out. These are in relation to how revolvers are loaded and unloaded. The side gate has a gate beside the cylinder. When opened, an ejector rod is used to extract a spent casing from the cylinder, followed by a new cartridge being loaded. The cylinder is rotated and the process repeated until loading is complete. A top break revolver opens on a hinge, exposing the back end of the cylinder. This allows all the casings to be extracted at one time. Loading can then be done by loading all the cartridges at once, or one at a time. Last, the swing out has a cylinder connected to a rod that swivels out of the frame, the loading process being the same as the top break. In modern media, we'll see swing out revolvers and typically side gates in old westerns. So why do we have a top break style of revolver in Darktide? The answer is simple. Warhammer is British, and the Webley Mark VI was the standard issue service revolver for the British military from the late 1800s to 1963. That's 12 years before Games Workshop would be founded. This type of revolver is synonymous to British gun culture, like the Colt 45 would be to Americans. So I can see why Fat Shark would want to pay homage to that type of revolver for a stub revolver and not this abomination. These are the Agrippina and Zorona Quickdraw stub revolvers respectively. The Agrippina is your hip-fire, fan-the-hammer, yeehaw revolver. It has 5 shots and reloads with a speed loader. The drawbacks are a lack of ADS and the damage is lower. We'll get into that later. The Zorona is for when you want to be prim, proper, and actually aim. You reload each cartridge one at a time. Quick side note, in the reloading animation, you see them only eject the number of casings they shoot, which is a nice attention to detail. Your damage is also higher. Its drawbacks are slower rate of fire and a situationally slower reload. I treat these two as priority threat killers. The base stat has a bonus to crit damage, so I leaned heavily into that. The Zorona I'll run with my veteran, using surgical and deadeye, meaning I only have to wait half a second and my shots are almost guaranteed crits. With this, I can eliminate most targets with a single shot and only a couple shots for heavier threats. The veteran's talent for extra ammo is a nice touch. The Agrippina I run on my Zealot with Crucian Roulette, and depending on my team's loadout, I'll either go with hand cannon or surgical. Hand cannon helps with carapace enemies, while surgical helps with ammo efficiency, as I'll be popping crits without having to space my shots as much. The speed loading also helps with the close-up aggressive play for zealots, while the veteran has plenty of tools for reload speed for the Zorona. Now, before I start comparing these two to real life, I have a brief rant. There is no reason lore-wise why this weapon is on par with plasma and bolt weapons in-game. I could say the caliber is large, the bullets are solid brass for penetration, revolvers are just built different, but I can't give you any valid excuse for why these revolvers can hold their own with weapons that spit molten plasma that can even threaten ceramite armor, or bolters that are pretty much rocket-propelled armor-piercing grenades. My only thoughts are that the developers want to make sure all the weapons are viable because we've seen what happens to other games if only a couple weapons are meta. If me saying suspend your disbelief is a cop-out, here's my rebuttal. There's been not one, not two, but 3 games in recent time that have a Lord of Change as a boss. You know, the creatures made of magic and have killed space marines with a flick of their staff. So while tweaks can be made, I understand their position of having a weapon be viable at the sacrifice of lore. To be clear, the reason why I'm apathetic about the power level of the Quickdraw, but critical about its design, is because you have to make sacrifices to make the gun viable. However, meanwhile, you do have control over making the design look functional. It won't affect the gameplay for how good the gun looks. That being said, the opposite is true to where if they do it wrong, which we'll go into detail on, the gun will still be fun to use. Nobody is looking at the design of this gun saying, oh, I won't play it because it's not true to form. If the gun is fun, that's really all that matters. So just take the rant as just a means of entertainment and just to throw some knowledge in about gun design. Don't look into it any more than that. Now let's nitpick the hell out of this weapon design. It's very loosely based off the Webley Mark VI. The only other top-rank revolver of notoriety is the Schofield Model 3, but that's American, so I doubt it. Now I tried to find a revolver in real life that looks close to this, and I gave up for reasons you'll see. This revolver is a mess. It's a mess. The more I look at it, the more I scratch my head. For one, when reloading, you can see the inside of the cylinder, and seeing how thin the wall between each cylinder is sketches me the fuck out. Like, that's where the firing happens. I'd be afraid of this blowing up in my hand. Speaking of which, let's talk cartridges. Odds are this thing is rocking 357 at best. That's based off the fact we have one top-rank revolver in existence that shoots 357, and mind you, that was made in 2016. But that revolver can hold 7 rounds. Most hold 6, and we can hold 5, and 5 decent-sized ones at that. Which, sure, we could have wider bullets, but they necessarily wouldn't be more powerful than 357. Hell, even in my 2 World Wars 45 ACP isn't more powerful than 357. So the only reason I can say 357 is because any larger, and due to the nature of the frame of the revolver having a hinge and a mechanism to keep the frame locked into place, larger calibers will eventually cause the weapon to fail after extended use. Hence why we shifted over to swing-out revolvers, as having a solid frame let us ramp up calibers. While we're talking about frames, let's talk about the lack of a mechanism to keep the frame together. You can see the disconnect is here, but it looks like the only thing locking the frame into place is our faith in the Emperor. I don't know what this is doing around the barrel. I can only imagine aesthetics, and by the throne, look at this trigger. I can only assume it's gotta be the most sensitive trigger to exist. We can also assume, since we don't touch the hammer on the Zerona, it's a double action only trigger, where however we can optionally manipulate the hammer on the Agrippina, meaning it's a single double action trigger. However, with it being a top rake, we shouldn't be able to fan the hammer, but I'm willing to let that slide as fanning the hammer is fun. Single action means you pull the trigger and the hammer goes forward. Double action means you pull the trigger and the hammer goes backwards until it hits the break point and goes forward. Then we have a hammer that looks like an absolute pain to fan the hammer with, plus the hammer doesn't even move when firing. I'll admit that's a severe nitpick, but the autogun's charging handles reciprocate when firing, so it's a shame they missed a detail like this here. Lastly, why the one with the shorter barrel does more damage than the longer barrel just hurts. I gotta stop, because what was meant to be a couple paragraphs of comments has turned into over half a page of me ranting about this subject. Now, even though I've gone way into the weeds on why I don't like how this revolver is designed, I still love the concept of using one, and will continue to do so in game. It will never not be fun to ignore the sci-fi weapons and go full cowboy in the 41st millennium. I just wanted the few of you who look at this and wonder, why haven't I seen a revolver like that? Because it wouldn't work. That's why. Thank you all for watching. I will not apologize for the rant taking up a third of the video. The people needed to hear this. Like and subscribe as always, and I'll see you next time out in the warp.